I'm doing great. How are you doing? All right. So we've started recording. I think we're going to give people a little time to flow in because I sent out the invites a little late. Before we do that, is there anything in particular that you've been working with that you'd like us to talk about, or any challenges you're having in meditation or any aspect of spiritual life? Gotcha. Okay. Well, why don't we just start by letting the dust settle a little bit, and I'm sure people will pile in when they realize that I sent out the invitation. Let's just let our day fall off of us. Let ourselves slow way down. And just let go of this nagging sense of time that pervades everything we do. Step into the eternity of this moment. Then, with our attention at the forehead and crown, and our eyes open, just sort of looking at a spot on the floor, we're going to begin to breathe. As you breathe in, you're right there with your breath, watching every inch of it. As you breathe out, you're riding that breath all the way down. You're going to become the watcher of the breath. As you breathe in, breathe out, and nothing else. And as the mind tries to take you away from your chosen point of focus on the breath, we'll just return, return, return to the breath, gently and without resistance. So let's spend some time there. Return to the breath. Let your body and mind slow way down. Nothing to run off to, nothing to understand, nothing to figure out. I want to talk to you just a little bit. So you're somebody who has spent a fair amount of time in meditation, and I'm certain you've run into moments in your meditation where everything just suddenly slips into a place of harmony, where all of a sudden there's just this comfort, and somehow the rhythm of your breath just feels natural and good, and everything just feels open. How does meditation get you there? Well, it gets you there by removing your resistance. In order for you to stay focused on your breath, first there's usually a battle, and that's where the mind comes in to try and take you away from that. But then there are these little pockets of space where, because you haven't been feeding the mind anything, that resistance drops away. And what's left is very comfortable. Kind of makes you wonder why you resist in the first place, right? It's like one thing feels good and the other thing feels like we feel most of the time in life. The reason that dropping that resistance feels good is because in that moment, you're no longer split between two things. In that moment, you are a whole person. Whereas before that moment, you are a mind that thinks you need to be doing something other than you're doing, and a consciousness that is trying to actually reestablish some gentle control over where it places its attention. So you're split, and there's this battle that ensues. But because the practice of meditation is to continually not feed that battle, to continually not feed that part of you that wants to separate off, that part just kind of dies down, and you start to fall into moments of completion. In those moments, what's so different about those moments is you're no longer asking the moment to be something different than it is. You are 100% released to the moment that you're in. Meditation makes that easy because it simplifies the moment way down into one thing, essentially, the breath. And then that kind of narrowing down opens up into an ability to just abide in a silent space here and now, not wishing your way into some future event, not trying to change some past event. Everything just clicks into place. This happens when people are deep in prayer. This happens when people are deep in meditation. This happens when people are 100% given to some work of art that they're creating. It happens whenever you let go of your resistance to what's in front of you. Can you see how this relates to your procrastination question? When you're procrastinating, and we all do it, and I do it too, you're not dealing with someone who's never procrastinating. But when you're procrastinating, what you're actually doing is suffering, right? And you're trying to avoid suffering at the same time. So when you're procrastinating, you're saying to yourself, I really need to be doing this, and I really need to not be doing that. Both at the And so very similarly, you're splitting yourself. And so you can't feel good that you're doing it, and you can't feel good that you're not doing it. You know, um, I actually, one of the things that was very important to me early in life was music. I sing. And this was a huge part of how I expressed my freedom. And I remember when I first started working with my teacher, her idea of what I should be doing was much more construction work and moving heavy rocks and things that that I had no interest in at all. In fact, a strong physical aversion to. And I remember, but when you are on, shamanic grounds, the expectation, you really can't be there and fight inside yourself the entire time because everyone around you feels it. And it's actually not acceptable. And so there is this constant situation that you're put in where you are designed to fight it and you actually have to give into it. And, it was funny. I remember when I first gave into it. So I think I was pulling weeds around these tiny rocks, which I could care less if rocks have a few weeds around them, and my body wasn't used to it, and I had some spinal problems that were just causing me a lot of pain, but there was this struggle to just be where you are and do what you're doing and be okay with it. And I remember when I first really just gave in to what I was doing, the first the first version of that was an understanding that I didn't have to ask myself if I wanted to do this or not. That whether I wanted to do this right now did not have to be a relevant question. And the funny thing is, removing that question removed everything that was hard about it. When that question was just no longer on the docket of questions in my head, suddenly I could just do what I was doing. And what I realized in that moment, that what I was doing was not different than anything else. It wasn't different than singing. It wasn't different than creating artwork. It wasn't different than writing a paper. It was just one more doing that I wasn't assigning a whole bunch of meaning to. And because I wasn't assigning all of this separate meaning to it, and I wasn't asking a bunch of questions about whether or not I wanted to do it even though I was doing it, I was no longer split, which meant I could do the work and actually still feel that feeling of completion, that feeling of wholeness, and that feeling of people have kind of turned the word synchronicity into something else, but it really is a feeling of everything sort of falling in place in a very natural way. And so everything flows through you in a way that feels good. And it's because you're not pushing towards something and pulling away from it simultaneously. That was the first time I ran into that. there were other times where, so we would meet every single night to meditate, and there were some nights where I just wanted to stay in my little apartment by my little pond, and, I would be lying there, and I would feel this unbelievable resistance. On the one, I felt accountable, like I had to show up. There were people who would know if I didn't show up. And on the other hand, I just didn't want to do anything tonight. I wanted to lay there and stare at the ceiling. Maybe I'll meditate in bed, I thought. And I was tired. I was really exhausted. I'd been weed whacking that day, and, I absolutely abhor physical labor. And I just remember thinking, there's just no energy. There's no energy to get in my car, drive down there, walk to this little renovated chicken coop where we would meditate, and do that again, and then wake up the next morning and meet there again at the crack of dawn. But then at some point, I would say, nope, okay, I'm doing it. And I would let go of the question. And what was always so amazing to me was that all the exhaustion that was keeping me from wanting to do it, in that moment, would lift. I'd feel clear, I'd feel energized, I'd feel good. So what's the difference, right? The difference is not my physical body. I'm in the same body. The difference isn't what I did earlier that day. I still did difficult things earlier that day. The difference is the system of stories that I was tapped into around the event. We tangle this complicated web of meaning around everything in our life. There are things we like and things we dislike. And I'm a firm believer that people should try and build their life around things that they naturally enjoy doing. However, if you're going to choose to do something, the spiritual warrior lets go of everything else and just abandons themselves to the task at hand. Not because it's the best use of their time, not because it's the right use of their time, but if you've chosen to do something, abandon yourself to it for the simple reason that any other path at that point is going to be a path of suffering. Sure. Well, I mean, it touches your heart in a different way, doesn't it? And so those are ways that we naturally drop our resistance. But all the training comes in those areas where we think we can't go, right? We create these boundaries according to our likes and dislikes, and they limit us. They limit us from the next steps. You might take a few steps into something and realize, oh, I'm in the wrong place, and then choose a totally different path, and that's fine. I have collapsed my life and rebuilt it many times. But the steps that you take, if you're really going to bring what you've been learning, and you've been meditating for a very long time, if you're really going to bring that into your life, you have to bring it into those choices, which means every one of those choices becomes a spiritual practice, not a practice of willpower. It's not, because willpower is just pushing against yourself, right? It's saying, I'm going to do it even though I'm going to fight against it the entire time. That's willpower. Instead, it's willingness, right? Big difference. I'm willing to just step into this, and I'm going to stop telling myself that I don't want to do it. I already know I don't want to do it. I'm going to stop talking about it to myself, and I'm just going to be with the purity of every thought and movement involved in this task. And what you're going to find is that that task feels very similar to the tasks that you think you like. There are no good or bad tasks, just the meaning we assign to them. And I can tell you, as someone who's been at this a very long time, it's not that the resistance goes away. It's that, I mean, like, I still come up against things that Liam, the personality, does not want to do. And I still catch myself clenching. But because you are practicing spiritually, you've got that thing in you that then says, okay, there's room for some growth here. I am, as a spiritual practice, going to let all of that go and step fully into it. And one trick to get yourself to do that when you're at the end of a day and not feeling like doing it is to make the actual part of the task that you're committing to in that moment much, much smaller. So, like, there are people who, for example, do yoga, but they really, really don't feel like doing yoga, but they know that they're going to feel better if they do yoga. And so what they do is they come up with something that they can see themselves not completely resisting. So maybe I'm going to do 3 sun salutations. And what they find, because anybody can do that and you're done in 3 minutes, and what they find is if they do that, then they very naturally have kind of opened a flow where they can then commit to more. And so for me, when I'm writing a paper, it's like that. It's just like I don't write on their right paper. I write on their, uh, create table 1, or, you know, write the introductory paragraph. Something that my body doesn't recoil at. And then I make that a spiritual practice. When if I'm going to write paragraph 1, or if I'm going to create this table, my spiritual practice, just like yours is breathing when you sit with me, is I'm going to let go of everything I assign to this process as far as meaning goes. And I am just going to do, do, do. I'm not going to close my heart. I'm not going to close my mind. I'm going to keep my wits about me, and I'm just going to flow everything I have into that. And what I find is that if I do that, because I'm feeling better midway through it, suddenly I realize that everything I hate about writing the paper is an illusion. And getting started is the hardest part. So it comes down to how you deal with resistance. I mean, it sounds like you're a little overworked. Okay. Have you ever heard of a Pomodoro timer? Mm-hmm. Uh, and usually it's a tomato icon that they use for that. But what the Pomodoro technique is you set a timer for 25 minutes. And for those 25 minutes, you are not allowed to be distracted by anything. You literally have to work for those 25 minutes on your chosen point of focus. At the end of 25 minutes, then I think there's like a 5 minute or a 10-minute break, something like that. You can look it up. And then you can do whatever else you would have done. And then you go back and you set it again for another 25 minutes. And during that time, you're not allowed to do anything else. But for a lot of people, that actually helps get rid of those distractions. Because that time, you don't get it back, right? It's only worth what you spend it on. Hmm. Hmm. You know, so one of the spiritual practices that is popular in like Shiva yogis, um, is this idea that if you're going to have to work on things that are not your spiritual life or things that don't touch your heart in that way, that you make a spiritual practice of getting as organized as you can possibly get. The idea is to get them done as quickly as you possibly can so that you can return to what your life actually has, what you've assigned the most meaning to. So for them, when they're doing their work, they will organize every little thing they need to get it done. And then the practice is, can I concentrate? Can I stay that focused to really get something that took me 3 hours yesterday done in 30 minutes? Just something to think about. I'm just saying, if it's separate from your spiritual life, it doesn't have to be. You can turn it into something that has a lot of meaning attached to your spiritual life simply by recognizing that it is taking time away from your spiritual life. Well, I promise you, like, if you organize your workday, when you sit down to meditate, your mind is going to be in a very different place because it will be very organized. The order that you create around you actually informs how far you can go in meditation and vice versa. So, your life, when you really step onto this path and start working in this way, your life, your secular life and your spiritual life actually inform each other and build on each other in really, really useful ways. The spiritual work that you do, the meditation and everything, changes how people respond to you, creates buffers that make it harder for you to get distracted, gives you more energy and focus to be able to do your work. And then the focus and order that you bring to your physical life makes it so that when you are going deep in meditation, you are less distracted by those thoughts, which means that you can actually go deeper, expand more, and see more in that vast ocean of silence. For me, there's a sound that I hear in meditation. It is this deep, pregnant, ringing sound. Some people feel it like a physical vibration, other people see it as a light. For me, it's a sound. And I follow that sound because that sound leads back to the highest consciousness we have access to. But when you really spend a lot of time every day sitting with that sound, you start to realize there's like a certain place you can get as you're tracing that sound back to its root, and you get stopped. And you find you just can't quite expand any further. And it's very hard to put that into words because we're outside of the world of things. But what I learned was that how I lived my day determined where that stopping point was. And so I started going back and tweaking how I lived that day. Was there some anger that I indulged in that day? Was there some inner resistance that I allowed to kind of split me from my focus that day? And you can get really nitpicky with it because, the process is nitpicky. But there are levels of that are also just very blunt. That, I mean, I think probably to an outsider, it sounds like you're really micromanaging how you live your day, but the reality is your day feels much better. The reality is when you let go of you, when you let go of that resistance, everything feels much better. So it's win-win on both sides of that equation. And then when you go in meditation and you really give yourself to that expansion, you can get further. Yeah. And it is okay for it not to. And with everyone, that happens because it happens in waves. So you have times where the wind is at your back and times where it isn't. So that's going to happen. But eventually, you do come to understand what's aligning when it does happen. And you come to a place where you can actually step into that better. Eventually, I came to a point where if I had to sit down and teach a class, even if I was coming from a very busy life, I could sit down and boom, everything just goes to the side. And then it can flow through. And you've been working with me for a very long time that way. And you see me, when I come in from those classes, I'm often racing there in traffic from school with no idea what we're going to talk about. And I sit down, move everything aside, step into meditation, and open up. And then it flows. And you do get there. So go ahead and just do the work. When those accidents happen, you know, just notice them. And you'll start to see that's just a place in consciousness that you actually know how to go to. It really just comes when you let go of everything else. It comes when you stop resisting. The meditations that seek out positive feelings, are working on the personality, right? And sometimes they're working on just making you feel more grounded. And those can be helpful for people if they are in a state of chaos. But those are contemplations. I don't consider those meditation. People use the word meditation, but they're meditations, which is a little different. Meditation, in its proper form, to my understanding, is basically letting go of everything that isn't you. It's letting go of all those parts of yourself that are just being held in place by your inner dialogue and your attention, and seeing who you are without it. And who you are without it at first might feel neutral, but it actually starts to kind of charge you up. And when you really slip into it, it is neutral, but it is also a good feeling. Well, consciousness is not limited, and you are consciousness. It's only our system of stories that become this little cage that hold us in. All these things we think we like and dislike, and we buy it, we believe it so strongly. But meditation, real meditation, asks you to let go of it for a period of time and see what you are without it. And then you can test that. When you at night suddenly have something you have to do and you notice that there's all this resistance, or during the day, you're being asked to focus and you notice there's all this resistance. That's why you're here, right? You're here to actually come up against that challenge and say, okay, can I let go of every story I have about that for the next 25 minutes and just see what that does for me? Just really give myself to that work, really just open myself up to reach for whatever I need to get this done, to get as far as I can get in 25 minutes, to do the best thing that I can do, to not overthink everything, and just really throw myself into it as a spiritual practice. And if you do that, what you're going to find is you get more done than you probably get done some days. Time actually slows down when you do that, and you find you can get more done. And I actually mean that literally. But that's something you have to experience for yourself. And you actually, by the end of it, you feel good. You don't feel tired because you did a bunch of work. You feel good because you opened up all the energy circuits in your body and let them flow. I was a massage therapist for 15 years, and that's very hard on your body. And, I've never been one of those incredibly vital people. I'm not a heavily energetic person. And I can't tell you how many times I went into a session completely drained, completely exhausted. But you have to be there. If you're going to help somebody heal, you have to open yourself up and you have to actually give. And it's that giving that just moves energy through your system. And by the time I was done, it was like, wow, that gave me energy and got something important done in the process. That's Oh, that's right. I remember. Yeah, we go back. It was like another lifetime ago. But my point is, the pain that you think is there isn't actually there. The pain is entirely in your resistance to doing it. And if you let go of the resistance, what you're going to see is that even though it may not be your life calling, there is nothing good or bad about it. But there is good in just the purity of the movement, to act with a clear mind without assigning a ton of meaning. You will find that it makes you feel better. Not the negative meaning we assign is usually not factual, and the good meaning we assign usually is just something for someone else to betray. It's just one more thing for life to take it away. And you didn't need it. Because actually, the open, clear space of reality is complete. It's complete, it's happy, it's energized, it's enthusiastic, without having to assign any stories to anything. You'll still be a human, and you'll still have things that you feel resistance for. But when that happens, you have a choice. And this week, I would love it if you would play with that. Try making that choice, even just once, and see what it feels like after 25 minutes. And then write something down so that you remember it. Like, this is why we do all of this, right? It's like we don't just meditate to sit quietly. We meditate because it actually brings clarity that improves our lives. So, like, a lot of people are going to watch this session and be like, oh, okay, they meditated for 5 seconds. But the truth is, this is why we meditate. We meditate so that we can bring that into our life. And you're ready to do that, or I wouldn't be bringing it up. It wouldn't be coming up right now. I always just throw myself open and speak. I never know what's coming out. So, how about for the next 10 minutes or so, we step back into meditation And we don't ask ourselves if we want to. We don't ask ourselves if we want to continue watching the breath. We let go of every story we have about it. We're not trying to achieve anything. We are just given to the purity of breathing in and breathing out and nothing else, and just experience the flow of that. Sound good? All right. Okay. Really nice sitting with you tonight. Have a good week. I will be back again on Thursday, and I hope you'll try this out this week. Night.